morning, everybody. I'd like to just take a moment to welcome our guest, Jennifer Molinoff from the Minnesota Board of Marriage and Family Therapy. She's the Executive Director, and here to provide some information and answer some questions, and take it away. Thanks for being here.
You bet. Thanks for having me. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Thanks for having me. I am Jennifer Molinoff. I am the director of the Minnesota Board of Marriage and Family Therapy. That is at some point in your future, licensing board. It is not your professional association. We deal with that on a very regular basis. People getting confused between the two, in part because our names are kind of similar and they both call themselves that they have boards, but the Minnesota Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, LMFT, is a professional association. We are the BMFT, or the Board of Marriage and Family Therapy. We're a state entity that issues licenses and regulates the practice of marriage and family therapy in the state of Minnesota. So, when people call me and talk about paying their membership association dues, I have to tell them I cannot take their money. But other than that, I try to be as helpful as I can and tell them things about the association that probably aren't true. But, yeah. I have a very simple handout. It just has some basic information. I'm still a paper person, so it sometimes helps me to see stuff in writing, even when people are telling it to me directly. It is very informal. I do this at lots of the graduate programs around the state when invited. But like I said, very informal. I'm going to just talk through the licensure process kind of linearly. If at any point you have a question, if I say something that makes no sense, just interrupt me and we'll keep going and make sure everybody gets their questions answered. And then there'll be time at the end. I'm happy to stick around and answer whatever questions anybody has for as long as you might need me to. So we'll start out. There's some basic information there about the board, where the board office is located, how to contact the board, how to get information from the board. Then you'll see the three names listed below. We're a very small entity. We operate exactly the same as every other health licensing board in the state. There are 17 different boards that regulate 17 different health professional areas in the state of Minnesota. We have 3 staff. It's myself, and then Nancy and Sarah are there as administrative support. We license at the current time approximately, not quite 1,900 licensed marriage and family therapists in the state of Minnesota. We have right around 300 licensed associate marriage and family therapists at any one time. Obviously that number is constantly changing, but it holds right around 300 as people move into that licensure class and then move out as they move into the LMFT. And then really at any given time, depending on the time of year and a couple of factors, anywhere from 350 to 500 open applications. So people who haven't yet obtained LAMFT licensure or LMFT licensure. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of kind of the size of the profession here in the state. We are historically about, well, I was going to talk about national trends in marriage and family therapy. California is an entity unto itself. About 1 in every 5 people in California, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, hold some type of mental health certification or licensure. So if you take California out of the equation, and they really do kind of operate actually fairly independently in terms of how they do health licensure, Minnesota is one of the top 3 states in the remainder of the country. Texas, Florida, and the state of Minnesota have the highest number in terms of licensed marriage and family therapy, and considered probably 3 of the strongest geographical environments for this type of practice. So depending on where we rank, we're probably 3rd or 4th in the nation in terms of number of licensed marriage and family therapists. I'll talk to you a little bit about, so you're all graduate students, right? Or maybe you're kind of, I won't put everybody in the same bucket, but so you're still engaged in obtaining your required graduate level education necessary for licensure in Minnesota. I don't know much about that. I know what to look for when it's all done. So I'm gonna start basically kind of right after, and what your steps will be upon completion of your graduate degree. The first formal interaction with our board is filing of the application to take the national exam in marriage and family therapy. That is the first interaction with the board. That does not mean, and nor is it true for most people, that that's the absolute first thing you do after you obtain your graduate degree. But filing the application puts you into our system as an applicant for licensure. That can be beneficial in lots of different ways. It makes the board aware of who you are. It gives you applicant status. So if some circumstance would arise where you would need to ask the board for some type of formal assistance, we're able to consider that. We can really only interact with people formally who are applicants to or licensees of our board. So if you're not an applicant, even if you tell me, I have the degree and I really am going to be a licensed marriage and family therapist someday, there's really not a lot I can do in terms of formal interaction with you, because at that point you're really just a citizen. And I can't, the board can't really provide you with any type of direct assistance until you're in that applicant status. So looking at the first page of the handout, you'll see it says file application with the board sooner rather than later. Again, I just think there's benefits to being in that applicant status. It does not mean that you're under any type of strict time requirement to take the exam. A lot of people think the minute I get approved to take the national exam, I have to rush out and take it the next time it's offered, and that is not the case. It simply gets you through that process to be approved to take the national exam at a day and time of your choosing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Some of the specific things you need to file that application: you need to have a transcript sent to the board directly from your graduate institution, and it has to indicate that your degree has been awarded. Every now and then we get a transcript and they've requested it. They're so anxious to start the process that they request a transcript before their degree is actually awarded, and we get it, and then we have to call them and say, well, you have to do it again, but this time make sure that the registrar's office actually has put your degree on there. You need to file the application. That's available on our board's website. We do not yet have online application processing. It's coming. Some of the boards have it. We just don't have it yet. So right now you still gotta print it off and fill it out the old-fashioned way. And I think it's kind of funny how, even to me, that's starting to seem dated. You know, like everybody thinks you should be able to do everything online, and you can't do that yet. So I apologize. And then you need to have a practicum affidavit. As part of your graduate education, all of you will complete or are completing, or wherever you might be in the process, a practicum or internship experience that meets educational standards. And there's a specific page in that application. Now, a lot of graduate schools, some graduate schools do it directly, some graduate schools have it kind of as part of their exit process for you, where they give it to you. I don't really know what you do, Ruth. I can't remember what you do, but you'll need to have a practicum affidavit that's been executed by someone at your graduate program. So those all come into the board office for review. Once received, it's usually somewhere between 30 to 60 days before you're notified that your application has been reviewed. That's really just a matter of timing, when your application comes in and when the next application committee meeting is scheduled to review those files. And then at that point, you'll receive notification. We do it electronically, so that by email. You'll receive notification from the board that your application's been approved. After the first page in your handout, the next pages, yours won't be, well, no, maybe yours will be green. Did you guys bring for color copies?
I did.
Okay, the green handouts, that's information about taking the national exam. You will know no differently, but I will tell you that January of 2015 is the beginning of a new exam administrator nationally for the national exam. So lots of changes going around right now. Now, internally, lots of people who are in the process are having to kind of transition between two different exam administrators. You won't be impacted by it, you'll know no differently. But this is the information from the testing company that'll be in place when you are most likely ready to take the national exam. So like I said, you'll receive an electronic notification that your file's been approved, and it will have information in it that tells you how to register. Now, this you have to do electronically. There's no other way to do it. I encourage you, I strongly recommend that you review all of the information relating to the national exam before you register. There's some things, like I said, new to us. The exam's going to be administered 1 week a month, every month of the year. There used to be exam windows. There were 4 windows, and they ran for about 15 days at different times of the year. That has gone away. It's going to be administered 1 week every month. The application deadline is the first of the month of the preceding month. So if you want to sit for it in February, you have to sign up by January 1. Currently, the policies in place, and I need to back up one step. Everything about the national exam is administered on a national level. State licensing boards are the conduit by which applicants get approved to take the exam, but the creation of the exam, how it's administered, all of the requirements under which it's administered, that's all determined nationally by the National Association of Marital and Family Therapy Regulatory Boards. So essentially the body that oversees all of the 50 licensing boards in the 50 states, they've promulgated the national exam. I offer that up because we get lots of questions. We get some people who run into bumps along the way in getting scheduled for the national exam, in taking the national exam, in passing the national exam. State regulatory boards have no ability to change any aspect of that or to somehow modify the conditions under which you as an individual would take that exam. Again, that's a nationally promulgated exam. We require it as a step for licensure, as do 49 of the 50 states. So from that perspective, we're involved in the process, but we can't really do any troubleshooting. I offer that up because under this new contract, one of the provisions that is currently in place is that when you sign up for an exam window, and the cost is $350 to take the exam, you cannot reschedule. You can move it within that 6-day testing window. So if you're signed up for Monday, you can take it Friday. But if you can't take it in that 6 days and you need to push it to another month, you are not refunded that $350.
Okay.
Between you and me and all the people watching us via webcam, I think that's a little bit of an onerous registration and non-cancellation policy, but we don't control that. We don't have the ability to change it for any of our applicants. I have no idea if, as the process unfolds and the contracts are renegotiated, if certain of those terms might change, but that's how it sits right now. So certainly if you're on track to think you might take the exam in 2015, which is the term covered currently by the current contract terms, be very aware of that. I just think it's a significant amount of money to have out there on the table, and I don't want anybody to somehow be out that money because they weren't aware of that provision. It's clearly stated in all of their materials, but like I said, I think that that's, I want to make sure people know about that. So, test results then, after you've registered and after you've taken the national exam, test results now will come to you directly from the testing company. That's somewhere in 3 to 4 weeks after the close of the window. So it's not one of those exams where you find out your results instantaneously right there when you're sitting there. It takes, like I said, about 3 to 4 weeks, and under the new contract, the exam results will come to you directly. It is, I'm sure I'm not the first person to tell you this, it is by many standards, it's a difficult exam. first time pass-fail rate is, there's about a third, right around 30 to 32% of individuals who don't pass the national exam when they take it the first time. That's a national standard. Minnesota applicants usually do a little bit statistically better on that first time pass-fail rate, but by really anybody's estimation, it's a difficult exam. I don't say that to scare you, and like I said, I'm sure I'm not the first person to have talked to you about it. But I do like people to go into it with as much information as possible. Again, because it carries with it a significant financial commitment to take it. I have had a board member, I've heard a board member say to students who they were talking with, you know it forwards, backwards, upside down, inside out, and they're like, no what? He's like, well, really everything. I'm like, well, who says that to somebody? But it is difficult, and we certainly see, like I say, statistically much higher rate of individuals who don't pass that first time as compared to the final exam, the state licensure exam, which we'll talk about as well, but which you probably know is administered orally. It's a face-to-face exam. That can cause people to become, there can be a lot of test anxiety around that exam as well. Statistically, that pass-fail rate, there's about 90% of individuals pass that exam on their first attempt. So if you're comparing them, national exam is more difficult. And when you take the national exam in terms of timing is completely up to you. There are different philosophies out there about that. Everybody has a different opinion about when is the best time to take the national exam. I've never taken the national exam, so I can offer you no personal input on that. I'm not a licensed marriage and family therapist. I suppose maybe I should start with that a little bit. I'm an attorney with a regulatory background, so I run a regulatory and licensure board, but I am not a practicing mental health professional. So, again, timing, seek out the assistance of your peers and your colleagues and your advisors and your mentors and make the decision that's right for you. You can take the national exam up to 5 times if necessary. It's a very rare occurrence, I want to stress that, without really coming back to the board for any sort of additional interaction. Once you pay that one-time application fee to the board, my board, you can take the exam again up to 5 times. If you have still not been successful at that 5-time mark, you then have to come to the board and submit what's known as a variance request, and that's really just providing the board with information about what plan you have in place to look at trying to achieve a different outcome. And that's really just the board's way of continuing to keep track of people who sit in that applicant status and determining whether there's the appropriate types of actions being taken by somebody who's an applicant for licensure. And again, getting back to the money, just because it's not a cheap process to engage in. You do have to pay the application fee to this testing company every time you would need to take the exam. So again.
Do you know if you don't pass the exam, do they give you some information about what you did not get correct so that you can study better, or?
So the question is, are you given information about how you did so that you can better prepare? The exam is broken down into 6 different domains, and your score is given to you broken out at that level. You don't get a question by question, this is what you got right, this is what you got wrong.
Okay.
But you do get scores broken out by the various domains, so it would likely give you an idea if there's a particular domain that you would need to work on. The other question where I get a lot, DSM-5 is in the exam beginning in 2015. So again, hopefully for the most part, that's always been your reality, so you're not surprised by that statement. the only other thing on that page that I haven't mentioned is I do put the website for the AMFTRB. As I said, that's the national body that promulgates the exam, and there's actually quite a bit of information on that website that can be helpful to prepare for the national exam. A lot of people come to our website and we have a link to it, but we don't have anywhere, all we have is information about applying for the exam. The AMFTRB website actually has quite a bit of information on preparing for it, studying for it, etc. Now, the other thing that's going on after you left graduate school, you're preparing or planning for the national exam, but the other thing that can occur is beginning essentially the day after your transcript indicates your degree has been awarded, because we have to have a day somewhere. So if the transcript says your degree was awarded on August 1st, beginning August 2nd, you can begin logging hours towards licensure. You can essentially begin that 4,000 hour or 2-year, however you are used to referring to it, process of logging hours towards licensure, assuming, of course, though, that you have the proper supervision in place. The rules are pretty clear that any type of client contact can only occur and be logged towards meeting licensure requirements if you're under the supervision of an LMFT board-approved supervisor. So the board put a process in place quite a long time ago to give certain LMFTs in Minnesota who meet certain requirements board-approved supervisor status. And so those individuals are out there able to serve in that capacity for all applicants who then now come through the process to seek licensure. There's a listing on our website of all of the individuals who have board-approved supervisor status, unless for some reason somebody specifically requested to not be listed. And then generally there's just the normal resources through your graduate program, through peers, through colleagues, through the MAMFT, where you seek out and find an individual who seems to be the best fit for you and the practice that you're going to engage in. There's a lot of things we could talk about in terms of supervision. It really depends on if you would have specific questions. I encourage people to spend time and do their best in finding a good fit with a board-approved supervisor. The number of questions we get in from people that I take from people seeking licensure, to which my answer really pretty much is, that's a question you have to take to your board-approved supervisor. That's something you need to discuss and work out with your board-approved supervisor. I think sometimes even I'm surprised at how often that is my answer. But really, the board can only provide guidance on things covered by law and rule. I can't serve in a case consultation role. It's just really not, well, again, I'm not a licensed therapist. But even beyond that, as the regulatory entity, the board can't become directly involved in providing client care, because that then triangulates us. So if there would ever be an issue brought to the board by a member of the public relating to that care, our role as the oversight entity has really been compromised. So the board-approved supervisor, and the reason board-approved supervisors were really created within our licensure scheme, they act as the individuals out there who have that direct knowledge, who have that one-on-one contact with every single person who's going to apply for licensure, who can serve in that advisory and supervisory capacity, can be the contact if an issue arises. The board doesn't just come to you as an unlicensed individual seeking supervision. We have a supervisor out there as well, who should know about you, who should know about your cases and your work, and serves in that role. So you're going to want to do your best to find someone who's a good fit. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the person who's the best fit is the person who leaves you alone the most, who lets you do what you want the most. Find somebody whose supervisory style is going to work best with you. Find someone who engages in the type of practice you think you're going to be engaged in. If you're going to work mostly with children, you're going to want to interact with a supervisor who has a lot of experience in that. Now this kind of has, there's kind of a double edge to this issue, which is some of you will be lucky enough to find employment in a place where supervision is there as part of your employment, right? You're gonna go to work somewhere and you're gonna have a board-approved LMFT supervisor on staff, and that person's going to serve in that capacity for you, and that's fabulous because there won't be a cost to it. And hopefully that's a great fit. There are certain situations though where if that's not a perfect fit, but it's your employment, and as we all know, as my mother told me many years ago, you don't get to like everybody you work with. You have, so you do your best and you do what that supervisor requires of you. But I do know some individuals who do then seek outside supervision, maybe help work on things or help with certain issues that maybe that in-place supervisor at your place of employment, that's not a great fit. So be open to those types of experiences. Find a good supervisor, but again, don't necessarily, the minute a supervisor starts calling certain things to your attention, my recommendation isn't to say to that person, you know what, this isn't a good fit, I'm gonna go find somebody else. Because sometimes it's those people who push you in the right ways and ask you the hard questions that really help you in the end grow. I'm sounding very parental there. We're the government. We're big brother, so I guess that's where it comes from. So the other part of that, included in your information is some more practical things. There's just a one-page handout about how those 4,000 hours break down. And we do look at it as 4,000 hours. There's language in the rule that talks about 2 years. I think that's really an outdated modality. It can be very difficult. Life often gets in the way of completing all of these requirements within 2 years of receiving your graduate degree. So we do look at it from an hour standpoint. So there's a breakdown of supervision hours that talks about how you break that 4,000 down. There's a supervisor's log that you can use. You aren't required to use it. You can create your own type of spreadsheet if there's a better way for you to manage logging your hours. If your supervisor has different ways they'd like you to log your hours, that's completely fine. In the end, you just have to be able to report it in the way the board wants you to report it when you're ready to file your final application. These supervisory logs, whether you, again, use this form or use something similar, they should be maintained permanently in your permanent professional licensure file. They do not come to the board with your application. Nobody in my office wants to get a stack of supervisory logs from every applicant who applies, but we do have cases where a question arises for whatever reason, and the only way to answer it is to look at logs. So the board could at any time request your logs. And so they should go, again, in your permanent file, as should really every document you file with the board. Hard copies of all of the applications. Make sure you make copies and put them in a permanent file for weird reasons that you will never expect to have happen, and then they'll happen. And it won't be for 8 years. So keep them electronically, keep them in paper, do something, but that's my recommendation. LMFT licensure. As you work your way through the process, usually most people take and pass the national exam at some point when they're obviously still in that supervisory timeline. Minnesota allows applicants application of the LAMFT license once you successfully pass the national exam. Because there's a condition to applying for that license, you won't find that application anywhere on our website. It will be proactively sent to you when the board has been notified that you've passed the national exam. Under current rule, it's not a mandatory license, meaning certain individuals pass the national exam and choose to not become an LAMFT for various reasons. Under the rule revision that I'll talk about a little bit at the end that's under review right now, it will become a mandatory license, meaning you'll have a time period in which to apply for it after you've been notified that you've passed the national exam. The most frequent reason that we see for people not becoming an LA is maybe they're so near the conclusion of logging their 4,000 hours that they're intending to file their state license application and take the state licensure exam within 90 days. Something along those lines. They've waited for whatever reason till the end of their experience to take and pass the national exam, so they don't view it as really a fiscal or a employment or a licensure necessity to do it since they're so close to applying for the LMFT. That's the most common reason we see. So licensed associate marriage and family therapist status gives you that credential. It tells the public, those who have knowledge of the system, that you've passed the national exam. And again, as we talked about earlier, a fairly significant hurdle on the path towards licensure. So that's a good thing. It does not change, however, the fact that you're still not independently licensed to practice in the state. So you have to stay under supervision. It doesn't change that from when you were in applicant status to now LA status. It does not change your capacity to bill, meaning however you were managing, however billing was occurring, and that all depends on in what venue you're practicing and what type of services you're performing and who your employer is, etc. But take a complete private party transaction. You can't bill third-party payers as an applicant. You can't bill third-party payers as an LAMFT. In just a private practice, no other overarching employment situation going on there. And that's really true of all of the professional level health licensures. You have to obtain independent licensure status before you can get credentialed by third-party payers. Continuing education is not required for individuals who have the LAMFT licensure, but it's encouraged. I mean, it's really encouraged that you stay current in your profession, essentially starting the minute you walk out the door of graduate school, because things change and they can change pretty quickly. That license is essentially, under current rules, set up to be a 5-year license, which is an issue for only a very small number of our applicants. Even keeping in mind, again, one, not everybody runs right out the door and takes the national exam right away, but even if you do take and pass it within 6 months of graduation, 90+% of all applicants for licensure complete all of their licensure requirements in under 5 years. For those small number who that 5 years does start to pose a barrier, there is again that variance process. And again, we see that happen for a lot of reasons. Most often, life gets in the way. You start a family, you move out of state for a little bit of time because your spouse needs to go somewhere to do something, and you can't work in your chosen profession for a while. Healthcare concerns or issues, so lots of reasons. But there is a method for dealing with that as well, is what I guess I want to tell you. But generally, under rule, the LAMFT license is codified as basically a 5-year license. So once you're issued it, you get to renew it 4 times. When you reach the end, the almost end of your postgraduate supervised experience process, the last step is obviously filing that last application with the state board. the application for state licensure. You can't file it until you are at or above the required 4,000 hours. You can't have your month mapped out and know you're gonna be there here and try and file it early to meet a review deadline. Primarily because you have to have your supervisors attest to your hours, and there shouldn't be a board approved supervisor out there attesting to hours that haven't surged yet. I'm sure that will not ever happen. I'm gonna speak highly of our board approved supervisors. I've included in the application some of the relevant pages from the forms, just so you start to get a feel for what they look like, because it becomes relevant to how you log. So right now, there's a supervised experience verification form to be completed by the supervisor. I will be honest, there are supervisees who assist their overworked supervisors, and that is understandable in filling out the majority of this information before they hand it to them. However, the information that's requested on page 6 really should be either completed directly by your supervisor, although they're going to rely upon you to look at your logs and know that those are the right hours to report. It's not unusual to have a question, to look at these hours and start to think, you know what, I'm not quite sure about how this got reported, this number seems less than this number, that doesn't seem possible. You call the supervisor. It's not a great day for the supervisor when they don't really know what they signed. So I strongly encourage you, and I tell board approved supervisors when I speak to them, to sit down together and at least complete the information on page 6 together with your supervisee's logs there with you, right? Then you're all on the same page. Then you as the supervisee can say, my supervisor completed that, and if a question would come to the supervisor can say, yep, we sat down together and did it. Again, very infinitesimal where that situation has ever been related to somebody not being completely honest on the forms. It's usually always, if the mistake's been made, it's exactly that. It's a mistake. It's an error in writing a number down or getting a date right, and it's very easily resolved. But trying to have that one-on-one with your supervisor when you're asking them to complete the forms really can help that. The other part about that I'll throw out there is when your supervisory relationship with the board approved supervisor is coming to an end, fill this out at that time. You might have a job right out of graduate school, have supervision provided it through your place of employment, and so now Bob Smith's your LMFT board approved supervisor. 6 months later, you might get another really, really great job opportunity over here, and Bob Smith is no longer going to be your board approved supervisor. Sit down with Bob Smith right then and complete these forms, and he can sign and date them right then at the time his supervision of you is ending. And then of course, the hard part is you have to keep them and you have to know where you have them. But that, I truly believe that's going to be easier than 3 years later. Now you're all done. Now you gotta go find Bob Smith. And you gotta hope he's still working there, and you gotta hope that he's still remembering that he supervised you for 6 months. So that's my one piece of advice, is to sit down with your supervisor at the time that supervisory relationship is coming to an end for whatever reason, to have those hours attested to. Because we have had people run into issues, we've had supervisors pass away. That raises its own unique challenges that we figure out a workaround, but it just makes the process more complicated for everybody involved. So that is why, as I sit here and talk to you who haven't even left graduate school, and I'm talking about the very last application you'll file with the board 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, and you're thinking I'm a little bit crazy, that's why I bring it up. Because in a relatively short period of time, it may be in your interest to be familiar with this part of the form and have a board approved supervisor fill it out for you, if that situation that I referenced might occur for you. So we're really almost almost at the end of that process. It comes into the board office, the board application review committee reviews it. Once you're approved, you're scheduled to sit for the state licensure exam. That's the exam that focuses solely on Minnesota laws and Minnesota rules regarding the practice of marriage and family therapy in the state. So it's not going to ask you about national trends. It's not going to ask you about theories of therapy. It's going to ask you about, you're waiting for me to give you one of the questions, aren't you? I'm drawing a blank. It's going to ask you about informed consent requirements in the state of Minnesota. It's going to ask you about legal age of consent in the state of Minnesota. Those types of things. Things that are going to be relevant to you as a Minnesota practitioner. Because the national exam is taking care of all of the national testing. So we focus just on that. I get asked a lot if Minnesota's the only state in the nation right now. There used to be more. We're now the only state that does an oral exam as the final exam for licensure. That's been in place since the license was essentially created. It's kind of like all of those big exams. Like, if I'm a lawyer, it's like the bar exam. And people are like, why do we still make people take the bar exam? It's really not ever been proven to have a direct correlation with how good a lawyer you are. And the answer is always because everybody who's a lawyer had to take it, and so they're not ever going to get rid of it. So I get asked if Minnesota is considering moving away from that type of process at the end of the licensure period. And I will tell you very honestly, there is discussion. I do not think there is trending that way. I think it's going to be here at least for a little while. What will eventually do the oral exam in will be too many licensees, too many applicants. If the profession continues to grow, even at a manageable, sustainable level for the population of Minnesota, it will at some point outgrow the board's capacity to continue to meet one-on-one with everyone seeking licensure. But we're not there yet. We have board members who, again, we have board members who essentially were part of the process that created it initially. So it's still here. And it'll be here for a while. And like I said, though, in terms of anxiety and apprehension, one, a long ways down the road. You're going to be nervous about things. There's lots of other things you could be nervous about before that. But two, as we sit here right now, 9 out of 10 individuals pass that exam on their first effort. And for those who fall into that 10% category, it's less than, well, it's statistically less than 2% who don't pass on their second attempt. Okay? So, again, you gotta put Ebola and lots of other things before that on your list of things you're gonna be worried about.
About 5, 6 more minutes because classes actually start, but we're okay with this. So if you have questions, etc.
I'm really about done. I mean, I took you from graduation to licensure. That's what I said I'd do at the beginning. I've given you a little bit of other information. I've given you board fees because it's nice to know what you have to pay before you have to pay it. Remember the fee not on here because it doesn't go to the state of Minnesota is the exam fee, that $350 that goes to the testing company. And then your interaction with the board after that, really quite frankly, could be extremely minimal. You have to renew your license. You have to attest to completion of continuing ed. If you're taking a continuing ed course that hasn't been approved by the program spot, that the board hasn't approved by the program sponsor, you're going to have to fill out a form to get approval. You may possibly at some point have a complaint filed against you and have to interact with the board on that level. Again, having a complaint filed against you does not necessarily mean that there's been something unprofessional, unethical, or illegal that's occurred. That process is out there to ensure that the public knows that there's oversight, and anything filed with the board is fully investigated. Licenses are always provided an opportunity to respond and provide information. The statistical percentage of LMFTs who are disciplined compared to our overall population is very low, lower than the other mental health professionals when you look at it statistically. So I tell people, the process is there, actually, it protects all of you as well as the public. So with that, I've done my information in a very short period of time. But I'm happy to answer questions, and if you have to go, that I understand, but I'm also happy to stay here and talk for however long you need. Yeah.
I heard that there's an advantage to having an AAMFT approved supervisor over an MAMFT supervisor. And I was very confused by that. Like, does that have to do with I might move away from
Yeah,
Minnesota someday?
that's really where you're gonna find it. So I'll talk about that real briefly. So, AAMFT approved supervisor status is administered by a professional entity. It's administered by AAMFT, which again is like if you took the Minnesota Professional Association. It's the national association that all of the state associations feed into, not a licensure board. Professional association. It's kind of considered the gold standard of supervisory credentialing. It is a more stringent, more difficult standard to meet than Minnesota Board Approved Supervisor designation. That was quite intentional. We wanted to build up a body of supervisors in the state and knew that it would be restricted if we held everyone to the AAMFT approved standard. But where it can help you is if your supervision is from an AAMFT approved supervisor and you do go to seek licensure in another jurisdiction. That can be easier for another state to look at that and say, okay, we're gonna accept all your hours because you had an AAMFT approved supervisor. Real quickly about reciprocity licensure. There is no healthcare reciprocity licensure in the nation, right? Your license to practice in any one state does not give you the automatic right to practice in any other state, except for maybe with the exception of nursing. They're about as close as you come to being pretty mobile. All of the mental health professional licenses and really all of the health licenses, you're given a jurisdictional license, which can then, you're gonna have to jump through some hoops if you move and wanna get licensed in another state, which is why I tell you keep copies of everything.
Yes.
Yes. Right? Because it's really helpful if you have documented everything you needed to get licensed in your first state of licensure, if you move anywhere else. But that's where AAMFT can help you.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, yeah.
So if you, in the situation where you have more than one supervisor who has to sign this form for you, are they filling out the entire form all the way to the affirmation and the letter of endorsement? Even though you haven't met your 4,000 hours, but now you're done with them? Or is it just that one page they have to fill out?
Pages 4 through 7, so not the endorsement.
Okay.
I'll talk about that in a minute, I kind of skipped that. Pages 4 through 7 are the supervisor verifications. You're going to file as many full pages 4 through 7 with your final application as you have had board approved supervisors.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Yeah, so if it takes you 6 board approved supervisors to get from start to finish, you're gonna have 6 sets of pages 4 through 7.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Endorsement, that's a specific licensure requirement. I threw those pages in there. You're only required to have 2 endorsements with your application. They can be people who serve as your board approved supervisor. So they can be both. Some people get all of their board approved supervisors to do an endorsement, which isn't necessary. You just need to have 2.
So you'll need, okay,
2 endorsements
I got it.
and as many supervisor verifications as you have had supervisors.
Can I correct that question?
Sure.
So there is a limited percentage of post-degree supervision that can be done via audiovisual means, and I know it's like 25% or something, and there should be permission, right?
Sure, yeah, so let me talk.
Explain
Let me talk a little bit about electronic supervision. And I will throw it out there in part because I don't know if we have any dual licensure track people or if we had any. Some of our rules differ from the most common dual we see is LPCC licensure or maybe LADC, so that's administered by the Board of Behavioral Health and Therapy. We're different boards, we have different requirements for licensure. because we wanna make it really tough, right? So only really smart people would do it. But electronic supervision is one of those places, and some people fall victim to that. Under the rule as written, supervision is face-to-face. It's envisioned that you're gonna be in the same room. The board routinely grants variance requests allowing up to 25% of your supervision, so 50 of the 200 hours, to be obtained electronically. But you have to have filed the variance request first and have it approved before you start to log electronic supervision. And you do have to provide some hardship grounds. So, travel, time, weather, cost. But if you're in Richfield and they're in Bloomington, and you really just don't like to get out of your pajamas, don't say that in your variance request. Because it's a rule, and in order to grant a variance, the board can, under rule, only grant a variance if there's some reason to grant it. Now, we have a rule revision under review. We're actually maybe close to almost the end. It's been a very long path. The rule revision makes 25% of supervision allowable without a variance for anybody out there. But it's not law yet, so
Say that
don't
again?
go into it thinking. The rule revision makes the 25%, 50 hours of supervision by electronic methodology okay for everyone if they want, without having to file a variance. Which in part just reflects that they're so routinely granted that the board has recognized why make everybody continue to request a variance. But that is the law as it currently sits, so until you can clearly know, and it'll be all over in big letters on our website, that there have been new rules adopted, you have to go under the existing rules. The other difference with BBHT is BBHT allows supervision by somebody who does not hold your license. Every now and then that trips somebody up too, so please realize that. Supervision for MFT licensure has to be by an LMFT, board approved. The Board of Behavioral Health and Therapy allows supervision by other mental health professionals, and every now and then I get somebody seeking to a licensure, and they come to me at the very end, and they don't have enough hours to get the marriage and family therapist license because all of their supervision was by a psychologist. And we love psychologists, but
So is that that's just for the client hours that has to be by an
yeah,
LMFT or all
supervision
the
of your direct
4,000?
client contact and your face-to-face supervision. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, so not group supervision.
No,
Group could be with somebody else, no,
no. All of your, if you're counting an hour towards the 200 minimum,
right?
it has to be with an LMFT board approved supervisor. Now, I just want to just say one thing on that real quickly. We'll have people come to the board and say, there's this fabulous expert on this who I want to have be my supervisor, but they're an LP, or an LPCC, or an LICSW, or a MD. Please let me count those hours towards licensure. We 99.999% of the time say no. Here's what we say though. Do that. Is that going to make you a bet? Is that what you want to do? You're free to obtain whatever training and mentoring and leadership in your profession that you want. All we're saying is that 200 hours of supervision over that 1,000 hours of client contact has to be by a person trained in marriage and family therapy. So they're gonna come at you from that perspective. And I completely get why people find that frustrating, but that's just how the board operates.
We'll do one more group question and then go to class, but if you have something specific for Jennifer,
I'm happy to
stay.
stay.
Okay.
I
good.
just had a quick question because I know sometimes, like when I was becoming licensed, it would get really confusing around supervision, and I just want to make sure that it is 1 hour of supervision, like the ratio is 1 to 5, correct?
Sure, I'll talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
We don't have a structure mandated ratio in law. Some boards do, psychology does. I think even BBHT is. What we have is, if you look at the numbers, it's a 1 to 5 ratio, right? 1,000 hours of direct client contact required with 200 hours of supervision, that's 1 to 5. That's recommended. There's talk in the the way the rule's written right now is you can't log more than 100 hours of supervision in 1 year. I again think that it's outdated language, it's why we're doing a rule revision, right? But the intent of that language is to say, your supervision should keep pace with your hours and vice versa, right? The board maintains the discretion to really ask anything of any applicant it wishes. And I have seen the board say, okay, you did 47 hours of supervision in the last 3 months before you filed your application, but you've had hours. And again, it's not a barrier to licensure, but I've seen questions asked, and I've seen in rare cases the board putting a few additional requirements on somebody before they can obtain licensure. But it's not a hard and fast mandated ratio. Should you be doing 40 hours of therapy with 1 hour of supervision? No, that's for your own protection, right? And your board approved supervisor shouldn't be allowing it to happen either. That's for their own protection. There's clinical liability here whenever you see a client, right? But the simple answer to that question is there's not a hard and fast. We're not gonna take out a calculator and look at it week by week by week. Okay, that help? Thank you, you've all been
Thank
lovely.
you.
Thank you.
I'm happy-